an Empire Boxing and Unlearning Network production.
Welcome back to the Empire Boxing Podcast. I'm your host, Jana, and today we have a very special guest. And that doesn't take away from the fact that I say everyone's our special guest, but today we have none other than Mr. Tariq. Hi.
Hey.
We had a pretty fun pre-show, so I don't know if I'm going to survive this podcast.
It was a decent pre-show. Honestly, I have to say, just before we go on, I thought you were going to have an attempt at my surname, but I guess you don't want that to live in perpetuity on the internet, so that's okay.
Abdulrahman.
Oh, good job. 8 out of 10. Solid 8 out of 10.
8 out of 10?
Yeah.
What could have made it better?
You got to really go heavy on the H. No, not so much the R, but the H. Yeah. No, not quite.
No, not too much.
We'll talk about it later.
Fine.
Yeah.
Anyways, I'm about to get canceled. Before I do, welcome to the show. This is really fun. I have lots of stuff I want to talk to you about, including everything from, for those who haven't been to one of the Empire shows or seen our pay-per-view, shame on you. 1, 2, Tariq is one of our commentators, a colorful commentator and a color commentator.
Watch it.
No, I mean, because you're funny.
Yeah, I know.
Jeez, this is gonna be rough. Anyways, and so it's been amazing working with you, having you as part of the events. You know, your depth of boxing knowledge is just such an asset to us. And then also, I mean, you're kind of cool too.
Oh, thanks.
So there's that. And then Tariq's very involved with Boxing BC, Boxing Canada, the athletes development, the high performance team, Sting. Like there's so many things that you're doing. So we have tons and tons of things to talk about.
Awesome.
Which I'm really excited about.
Thank you all for having me on again. It's great to be part of the team again.
Of course. Okay. So first question, let's just talk a little bit about what your role is in Boxing BC and like tell us a bit about yourself and that. Just how that all spins together.
Sure. It's a bit of a multifaceted, actually, role. Obviously, primarily, I'm a coach. That is obviously my first love. I'm no longer a competitive pugilist. So, when I moved to Canada in 2017, that's actually the first thing I did, I think, before I even, got a phone contract was, where do I sign up to coach? I'm a member of Team BC's high performance team. So there are 4 other coaches that we run the high performance directive for Boxing BC's competitive team. And then I also wear another hat. I'm the second vice president of Boxing BC as well. I've sat on the board this will be my 4th year on the board. I started off as first director at large, and then I moved into that executive role with VP, which has a whole spectrum of things that we do, everything from policy and governance to, troubleshooting any issues or, dispute resolution, fundraising, etc. and so forth. I'm also an official. I referee and judge matches, very controversial most evenings.
We're getting to that.
But that's part of the job. And I'm here to really facilitate and promote the sport of amateur boxing in British Columbia, which is, the mandate that is set actually for Boxing BC with Boxing Canada and Sport Canada.
That's awesome. You definitely are what I would say is an ambassador to the sport from a coaching, officiating and even policy.
That's generous,
writing.
But yeah, thank you.
Yeah, no, for sure. There's a lot of, there's a lot of people that have a ton of respect for, the whole board, but I know that you're a big part of, pushing things through and making policy and having the important conversations that need to be made so that, the entire organization is moving forward in a really progressive and healthy way. So.
Sure. Yeah. No. I mean, you're only as solid as your policy and your laws, really. And I came in and many moons ago in a previous life, I was a lawyer, and part of obviously my previous remit was actually drafting policy and helping policy and governance, and that was something that I kind of dove naturally into as part of my first point of action when I moved into Boxing BC. Not to say that the policy wasn't solid before, but I think moving with the times is key, especially with how fast society is progressing and advancing and morphing. Yeah. The sport is simultaneously doing so, and you need to have the bones of the association in black and white to be able to ensure that everybody who's participating in the sport is moving forward. I don't know what Matt Hoffer's doing behind me. I really don't want to know at the best of times.
I couldn't hold that one together. Is that a banana? We hope it's a banana.
I hope it's a banana. I don't want to. I'm not looking round.
Sorry, continue.
Yeah. Jason's pupils are dilated, so I'm a little bit worried.
I think they're always like that, though.
Oh yeah. Oh, actually,
a lot of screen time for this kid.
Jason, we need to have a chat. Just say no.
Jason, by the way, Jason's at 24 years old forever. We've decided that he is
I thought he was 24 years
Exactly.
old.
Thank you. Okay,
Excellent.
moving
Okay, yeah. Obviously, athletes are going to require different they have different needs as time goes on. So yeah, that was something that came naturally to me is really kind of developing the policy and governance. And then that's actually, I sit on the policy and governance committee for Boxing Canada. So from a national level, we helped, I think it was a relatively temporary committee to, oversee the advancement of policy and governance from a national level as well.
Amazing. Now, when you first came kind of into the scene, it was direct to Boxing BC, is that correct? And then
Yes.
that's recently expanded into like a broader spectrum of kind of your skill set into Boxing Canada?
So actually, no, the first boxing organization that I joined here was another amateur organization in BC called Comsport. And it's look, Comsport was great for many, many reasons. I think, everything has a life cycle, and perhaps that was the end of its life cycle as I was coming out.
Sidebar, have nothing against anyone who comes into, let's say, onto the scene and thinks about how to do it differently.
No, absolutely.
Thinking outside of the box. I mean, I'm joking because, everyone joking about Comsport, but I actually really do respect that.
No, sure. Look, it was great.
Especially something that's so ancient and in its sense, like boxing's been around forever. A lot of the systems and policies and the way things are done are kind of like set in stone, you could say. So to come into the scene and think outside the box, I mean, power to you.
Yeah, I mean, coming in from obviously my history in boxing, coming into a province, BC, 5.5 million people, and there were 2 amateur boxing organizations, I was a little bit confused. What they provided was very pro style, amateur style boxing. It wasn't so much for me. So obviously, after one fight with an athlete who I then migrated into Boxing BC with, I stayed in the association as it is, and we have had touches of being able to represent BC on the national level, and move forward to kind of working a little bit with Boxing Canada and Team Canada. So very, very cool progression, and I've enjoyed every minute of it.
Now, for those who might not know, can you give us sort of a sense of what is required of an athlete to fall under the high performance team?
Wow. So it's a really good question, and obviously it's very different for each person. But the one or two things that I would say is consistency, and secondly is the adoption of the sport as a lifestyle. It goes from being recreational to progressive.
Right.
And once you're entering into the realms of progressive from a position of context of how you live your life, that's when you can begin to enter into a high performance level of training, level of high performance level of recovery, and obviously high performance in the ring. And so obviously high performance, the goal for people who are involved in high performance activity, whether you're a coach or a boxer, is to progress the athlete onto the national and therefore the international level. And the requirement for that really is, you have to immerse yourself within the lifestyle of being a full-time pugilist.
Right.
And the requirements of that, I mean, if you've watched any Rocky montage, it's something that is
sleep,
very
breathe.
challenging.
Yeah,
it's very, very challenging. And, your recovery as well as your performance are two very, very different things. I mean, we're very blessed in BC, and, I'd like to really kind of, prop up, props to, people like Ryan O'Shea, have come in.
Shout out to Ryan O'Shea.
Shout out to Boss Ryan, people like Jesse Pinheiro, Dave Bratt, all these gents who've come in and really kind of shaken up our high performance program. We can count on, we have sports scientists in our team, we have strength and conditioning coaches, we have access to sports psychologists.
Right.
We have a very detailed approach to our season. We have obviously different levels to our team as well. Our funding is on point. Our planning, our structuring is on point, and our high performance program is actually spoken quite highly of now, and that's half a decade's pivot and push towards very new age, new wave style of training and thinking, and the adoption of that has been hard, but it's now really showing the signs of positivity, and we're really, really excited for the season ahead.
Absolutely. I just think it's so cool how coaching in boxing specifically has really evolved.
Oh, absolutely.
Speaking with guys like, Jesse Ross Thompson,
Sure.
speaking to Julian Shua, speaking to Taylor Ramsdell,
Yeah.
And yourself, these, I'd say prominent figures kind of in our local and then international coaching fields. And then just watching the progressive and youthful in a even a broader sense than just age, but mindsets and ideas about coaching, and also the research and the time that people are putting into understanding the sport, understanding the S&C field, how that fits in developing athletes, and also even like what you're saying about sports psychologists, having them on the team. Sure. Like there's got to be, so many of these athletes go down the path of having their identity tied to what they do. All it takes is one injury or, something unfortunate to happen in the season. Sure. And it can be a complete breakdown for an athlete. Sometimes Absolutely. Things they can't come back from. So having all the elements and all the pieces come together sure. to like generate champions is something totally different than just kind of like basic coaching. Like creating and nurturing and generating champions, be it in the amateur or be it in pro, is like a factory.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's definitely changed. The game has changed in the last 15 to 20 years.
It's so cool. I'm so here for it.
If you're a high performance coach now and you're a mindful high performance coach, you're studying concussion management, you're studying nutrition, recovery, You're studying strength and conditioning. You're working with other people who are prominent in that field. You're a sports psychologist. You're a sports consultant. Yeah. You're an injury prevention specialist.
It's about time, right? Like
yes, absolutely.
It kind of makes you think like, what would have some of the careers been like? In prominent boxers from the past, like if they had these type of teams around
Absolutely.
them. And even also just like let's dive even a tiny bit further into like the biohacking side of like recovery.
Sure.
What would have Ali's career been like?
Sure.
What like
absolutely.
who knows?
Yeah,
Hearns,
absolutely.
like anyone sort of from that era. What
Sure.
kind of what extra years could we have gotten from those athletes? Or even how would their lives been post boxing as well?
For sure, absolutely.
Interesting question.
It's a great question. These are things that we think of. So who's the GOAT? Who's the greatest of all time? And it's and again it all really applies and draws down to context. Well, ultimately, did they have what they have now? Yeah. You can say that for any sport. You can say that for any active performance comparison. And it's really difficult. And it's something that I've had to really notice very, very quickly. When I had a conversation with the Team BC coaches when I wasn't a part of the Team BC coaching structure, for example, and looking at the evolution of the gentlemen and women that sat on that team to now, which is only 5 years. It's amazing now how multifaceted coaches are. I'm just putting a season plan in. I'm lucky to work with a 63.5 Team Canada alternate who is in BC, Logan Cloutier. He's a lad. He's actually just been down in the weekend. We've been sparring at a couple of gyms and and do some technical work together, and I plan people's schedule for the whole season. We have a month sparring plan, we have a month club show plan, we have a month tournament, both provincial, national, and international tournaments that we're attending. We've just arranged for his physiotherapy visits, his SCAT5 concussion-based testing, his mid-season concussion testing. So we've spoken to Dave Fries, as a sports psychologist. At the start of the season, we're looking at obviously injury prevention, injury management, and then his strength and conditioning. And I'm sitting there thinking, wow, like actually this is a lot of work, and to be a coach, that's sitting on that crest of the wave that's coming into, you got to kind of know everything if you want to be one of the best. And if you want to produce or help produce the best, you really need to be not so much a jack of all trades, but a master of all trades at this point. But BC is very lucky. We're very, very lucky from a provincial governance perspective, and how the board of directors in the last half decade have supported high performance in the province by increasing funding and seeking out full-time / part-time, people who are experts in that field to form up this team. So, we're from a medal perspective, obviously we haven't had nationals in a couple of years because of COVID. So, attending tournaments like the Brampton Cup or the Calgary Cup or the YYC Cup or the Western Canadians, things like that, BC are actually very well respected, and it's all in the medal count. If you look at the medal count and look at BC athletes, and when you compare population sizes and funding between the provinces, the big two are Ontario and Quebec, obviously, and then, it's kind of us, and then, kind of trickles down between there with all respect to everyone else. It's quite impressive where we're at, and it really is down to obviously that this almost obsessive application to everything's got to be tight.
Do you see BC kind of coming onto the same playing field as Ontario?
Absolutely.
Yeah. How long do you think kind of till we're there?
No.
Yeah.
Absolutely. You know, I was, you know, with all due respect to everybody, you know, and this is good for Canada. Ultimately, this is what Canada needs. Canada needs solid, competitive, provincial athlete pools. You know, the wider the pool, the better. Obviously, the selection for the national team. And having attended, you know, one national team training camp last October, and looking around and seeing, you know, 4 or 5 athletes from BC in a total of, say, you know, 20 athletes that were there, and there being no daylight really between those athletes, and from last October till now, seeing more and more BC athletes, especially our women. Our women are doing tremendously well on the national, international scene. You know, we've got Naisha Nakajiri from Griffins. You know, we've got Jordan Conrad. You know, we have a great selection, you know, of women who are coming through, and it's really refreshing to see.
Now, you mentioned Naisha and you mentioned Jordan.
Sure.
For those who may not know who that is, I have a great way for you guys to find out. We have on our YouTube available our Under the Lights show, which was an amateur boxing event that we put on in October 2020. And Jordan and Naisha fought on that event. And that would be just an awesome early dip into both of those two athletes and sort of their career here in amateur boxing in BC. Both of them very proficient, very skilled, and they don't mess around. Like they train night and day. So it's really the embodiment of what you were talking about.
I was that they are the embodiment and the representation of the question that you asked.
A huge shout out to those two ladies.
Absolutely.
We can't wait for you to turn pro.
Who are, by the way, they are obviously they're currently in Bulgaria. They both represented Canada very, very well. You know, congratulations to them both for that, and obviously Coach Peggy, who's obviously a BC coach, and she headed up that trip to Bulgaria for Team Canada. So this is what I'm talking about. You know, BC's really, you know, pushing ahead and coming forwards, and it's really great to see.
That's awesome. It's cool to hear all of this, not just from, you know, the path that the athletes are taking now, but it will improve their quality of life and their path after boxing as well.
Absolutely. You know, when you come out of boxing, you talk to a lot of people who are boxing in the 80s and 90s, and you compare those who are boxing in the 90s and they're not in the early 2000s and mid 2000s. You know, it's amazing to see there is definitely a positive correlation with, you know, injury, concussion, being able to deal with no longer competing and maybe not being involved in the sport, and that gap that it has in their life. That, you know, this is a big thing. This is a big issue, you know, compared to people in the last five years, for example, you know, with the support systems that they've had from a medical perspective, from a psychological perspective, you know, from a competitive perspective, you know, being more coaching pathways that are being applied, and younger people being involved in coaching, and there being less of a stigma. So, well, you're young, you must not know a lot, or you must not understand a lot, you know, and you know, this has changed. You know, people are really applying themselves in very, very committed ways to cycle out from being, you know, a competitive pugilist or a competitive athlete, not just in the sport, to being able to manage themselves physically and mentally after sport. And it's really interesting to see, obviously, the changes that are made, and it's really down to, like I said, you know, the application and the provision of these, you know, new wave aspects to the sport from a coaching perspective. So
now, tell us a little bit about how boxing first entered your life. You were mentioning you were competitive at one point. What did that look like? How did it start for you?
You know, playing around as a kid. You know,
define playing around.
getting a wee bit bullied as a kid. You know, growing
up. Tell everyone where you grew up.
I grew up in the west of Scotland. I grew up in a little town called Malachim, which is an old mining town on the west of Scotland. And how do you spell
that?
Mauchline.
Okay.
Yeah, it's
say it one more time.
Malachim.
Very cool. Okay.
Yeah, Scottish way to pronounce that CH is so. Yeah,
it's a little ASMR for everybody there.
Little ASMR, free ASMR for Empire Boxing. Obviously, if you ever need an Empire Boxing ASMR person, I'm your guy.
For sure. Get him a candy wrapper quick.
Yeah, you know, there were wee gaps, and obviously from a competitive perspective, and then going into university and falling in love again, with it, and then moving into law school, and then, being involved again, moving city to city. I've lived a relatively nomadic lifestyle, and been all over the world. And, every time I'm kind of in there, I'm back in the boxing gym. The first thing you do is, seek out boxing gym. And that's kind of where it's been at throughout my life, whereas I was a kid and, being involved in that and moving into, going to school and then from university. And there've always been little gaps, obviously, in there because I've, competed at other sports, at relatively high level in different sports and just from a recreational perspective in others, and not having that kind of discipline to really play it out. But what I was always fascinated with was being in the gym and working, even when I was, competing, working with coaches and seeing the way that they operate. I used to love it. And yeah, took a little gap. I was a lawyer for a hot minute. Realized
Thank God, though, for all those policies. Thank God for that typing skill set.
For the record, I don't know if my policy writing's great.
I don't know. We'll have to have maybe
that's
Dave,
why I do
Dave
it for
Brett
free.
on the show.
There's no accountability. I quit my career in law to actually open a boxing club. And at this point in my life, I was in the Kingdom of Bahrain, where my dad is from, and we opened Bahrain's first dedicated boxing club, and it was the first opportunity for me to have my own landscape and draw from all of those different experiences.
I was just going to ask you how much traveling influenced your sort of toolkit as a coach.
Massively so. And I think a lot of the ways that I coach or that I apply myself in coaching, and coaching is, I would like to consider the top part of coaching, probably the most important part of coaching is relationship management. And being able to create a positive relationship with the athlete. This is a combat sport, and it's a relationship of trust. And some of the coaches I think maybe that I had, with all respect to them, I didn't have that relationship of trust with them.
Now, is that because they came from a little bit of that kind of old school coaching style?
It was a few different factors, whether or not the gym was overcrowded, underfunded, whether or not, different mentalities.
And different even just cultures around
different
boxing.
cultural,
So a lot of these
aspects.
boxing gyms across the world are like sink or swim, dog eat dog.
Absolutely.
You come in and you prove yourself, and if you don't, you don't show up tomorrow.
Sure.
Kind of thing.
Absolutely, and the way a lot of the ways that I apply myself as a coach now is based on, well, I didn't have that, and maybe if I did have that, things could have been different for injury prevention.
Sounds like parenting.
Sounds a little bit like parenting.
Sounds like parenting.
So I guess.
So
I don't have kids.
So the correlation here is if you can coach an athlete in boxing, you can be a parent, right?
Honestly, listen, not far off it.
Really?
The responsibilities, I would say, are almost level.
Get a dog first.
Get a dog first, yeah, for sure. No, but I think a lot of the ways that I like to apply myself as a coach from a relationship management perspective, which I think is actually top of the pile, are based on avoiding relationships that I had with previous coaches and wanting to do better and provide more, and seeing the gaps in where their performance as coaches actually maybe let me down in some ways. Not to make excuses, obviously. There are limits to my performance based on my talent and my athleticism, obviously. That is something I definitely geek out on, and it's very much a bespoke application. Each person's very, very different. This is a very psychological sport. There's a lot of psychology that's involved and applied in the sport, and being able to, in my opinion, some coaches get away with one culture fits all. That's great, and if that develops success, then that's fantastic for you. I found that being able to develop a different style of coaching, communication, programming for athletes, based on, their personality type, their emotional range, what level of anxiety, say, for example, do they possess, what level of, analysis can they respond to, these, and according to that, definitely change it up.
It's interesting, like the thought that kind of came to mind when you were, saying that is, I don't think a lot of coaches are equipped to make those type of assessments, judgments, and like, just because here I'm thinking, like, as a coach, you've got athlete 1 walk through the door. Now, if you've got that, like you were saying, this rule, hey, if you don't fit in with our culture, then you're probably not going to stay in the gym. See you later. There's the door, sort of thing. And it might not be that harsh, but you know what I'm saying? It's sort of like either sink or swim kind of thing. Yeah. And how much talent's walking out of the door that's never, like these eggs that have never been cracked and developed. But then at the same time, like, how did you develop the skill sets to be able to make those type of one, to understand the depth of being able to identify talent and decide how to develop that talent on all those levels you just mentioned. Like that to me seems like a rare skill set application.
Yeah, actually,
or maybe it's just advanced.
I've never really thought about it in that
right?
way.
Like,
I think
about that moment.
Yeah.
It's like people always say like, I'm a good judge of character, or whatever. It's like that on steroids, the boxing edition.
I mean, that's a really good point.
Right?
I've never heard that before. I mean, for me, it was just like, this is naturally how I'm going to apply this. I've worked,
I'm sitting going over here, if I could do this to men, that would be amazing.
I mean, I'm actually not going to comment on that.
Like a dating thing?
But I mean, obviously, look, I've been your coach.
Yeah.
Right. We've
Poor
worked
guy.
together. Yeah, I know it was tough. Taught me a lot about how to be a better coach. And the way, for example, that you approach your training, massively dedicated, almost too dedicated. I have to kind of
chill out, Jana.
Chill out, Jana.
Yeah.
But obviously your understanding of the body. You're also a fantastic strength conditioning coach, mobility coach. You name it. You're up there, and your prep for your fight. And the debrief that's involved for your fight, win or lose, whatever that is, these types of aspects are very different for each athlete. And some coaches have a blanketed approach and say, this is how I do it. And if you click, you click. And this is maybe why you see athletes kind of bouncing gym to gym. And that's okay. Athletes got to figure out what works for them just in the same way coaches do. But yeah, it's a very interesting way to look at it. It could be a new field.
Yeah, and to be clear, yeah, right. I mean, well, honestly, to be clear, I don't think I'm not saying like what you're doing is the way, and everyone who's not doing it that way is a shitty coach. That's not what I'm saying at all.
Yeah.
But I am paying respect to just sort of that process of you have a new athlete in front of you, like, or someone you're aware of who switched gyms, like you were saying.
Sure.
Someone's bounced around into your hands, and you're going, how do I make the assessment to put this person in the coaching style that best suits them, to develop them in a way that no one else has before.
Absolutely.
And then running through that and being able to make that assessment, and then being able to also, am I guessing, probably course correct.
Yeah,
as
absolutely.
things work or don't work with that athlete. So I just think that's very cool, and that's an interesting concept to sort of unpack and think about. And I wonder, what comes to mind is I wonder what it would look like if there was a syllabus to that process, like if you could teach that process.
Yeah, I mean, it's a really, really interesting question. I don't know. I mean, I definitely think that it could be a part of the process, but I have to say, I'm pretty early on in my coaching career, in comparison to others. I have a lot to learn. I'm constantly seeking out new things to learn.
Curiosity is there, though.
This is the thing that piques my interest. I quit my career in law to do this full time, and I'm almost, I would like to say, or I've been told that there is a monastic approach to progression and to seeking out new styles or new methodologies or things like that. Now, so maybe what I'm doing isn't necessarily the best way to do it, but for some people that are working with me, there has been a little bit of success. So great, but it is definitely a trial and error thing.
I think kind of at the end of the day, the thing you can't argue with is that, there's an evolution to a sport. Therefore, there's an evolution to athletes, and there's an evolution to coaching. And if you're not learning, you're not growing.
Sure.
And I think that probably, I don't care who you are. I don't care how Freddie Roach you are. There's something to learn, right?
For sure.
And I would guarantee Freddie would probably sit up here and say that as well as he's approached. Because, you got the next gen in front of you, and they're doing something you ain't never seen before.
Yeah. But you got to have your goals, and I think this is what has helped me with my evolution as a coach. And, because I've had goals, and every time I reach a certain milestone or a certain goal, next goal. When I first arrived, it was, I want one of my athletes to be a provincial medalist. I want one of my athletes to be a national medalist. Okay, I want to be on the high performance team, and I want to be on the Team Canada coaching team. And I want to branch out simultaneously into pro boxing. There are every time you have a new level to your coaching, it's really pushed by having new goals. And just like athletes, if you don't seek out those higher goals and aren't challenged in obviously more challenging ways that kind of push the boundaries and help you evolve and succeed through evolution, it works in the very, very same way as a coach. If you don't have those goals that are pushing you and pulling you and working with higher level, I had to really change up once I started working with high level athletes, because I realized, hey, look, I'm going to let these people down.
Yeah.
They're putting their trust in me. Again, it's about relationship management, respecting that, and so therefore, being humble and eyes and ears open. Working with other coaches. And using any resource possible to see what works, what fits, and what doesn't. And obviously, like I said, it is a case of trial and error. I'm very early on in comparison to others at the start of my journey.
But I think some of the coolest things in life, the coolest experiences, start when you put yourself in a position that challenges what you know.
Absolutely, that's where growth. That's where
do I know enough?
Oh. Do I know enough? Well,
do I have the skills? And if the answer is no, that's exciting. Go find them. Go get them.
In my opinion, the answer should always be no.
Right? Yeah.
Once you start saying, "Yeah, I know enough," you're going to get left behind, because boxing evolves at a very, very fast pace.
Now, speak to us about, you were talking, on the topic of goals and milestones. Speak to us about your recent experience in the UK and kind of what that meant to you.
Oh yeah. There was it was fantastic. I mean, obviously, we went over to the Haringey Cup. The Haringey Cup's it's
quite prestigious.
Very prestigious tournament that's based out of
They
London.
sent me an invite. I had to politely decline.
Yeah, we sent out the. I think it might still be lost in the mail, actually.
Definitely was.
So Team BC invited some athletes over to London to compete at the Haringey Cup. There were a couple of us coaches that went over, myself, Dave Brett, and Jason Height from Island MMA, and our ex-president Dave Habib. We all went over. We took a handful of athletes over with us, male and female, and we had every single athlete reach the final. Everybody had to fight 3 times, I think, to get to the final. We had I think 4 gold medalists and 2 silver medalists. We ended up. Our athlete, one of the boxers I was working with, won boxer of the tournament. No. Braden Horkoff, great guy, absolute beast of an athlete and a fantastic guy. And actually, he's a great guy to talk to about a monastic approach to training. I've never seen somebody so dedicated to the finer details.
Right. Clear your calendar.
Very well read guy as well when it comes to the sport. We had a great performance. We had a great turnout. We won team of the tournament. The Haringey Cup is kind of one of those milestones that kind of a sub-international, international level tournament. It's up there with some of the other international tournaments amateur boxing can provide. And it was great to be back on home soil as well. And revisit that kind of British boxing culture that I've been involved in, with now adopted this Canadian approach, and seeing how coaches work and how athletes work.
Amplify the emotion of the experience for you?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I always wanted to compete at Haringey.
Right.
That was like a dream of mine. I never did. To come back as a coach and to have some success there and be respected by coaches there who are, and to be considered their peer was very, very cool. And that definitely catapulted my interest in, I'm really next season I want to do better. I've got these goals. I've got the following milestones I want to achieve, and how do I achieve them? And just working hard, quietly, and consistently to do so. I think, having said that, though, the most challenging thing I had, is I've always had my own gym, and I've had my own gym in Bahrain. When I was in the Sunshine Coast, I had my own gym for a few years. Obviously, life changes, things change in life, and I moved to the city last summer, and I've been lucky enough to be welcomed in by lots of fantastic gyms, and ultimately finding out, well, what works for me is having my own gym, having my own landscape.
Once you've been down that road, it's really hard.
It's really hard to come back. It is, and it's definitely a cultural thing, and it's not to say that what I'm doing is right and other people are doing is wrong. Absolutely not.
I think also it's like, if you're fastidious, it's really challenging to sort of like loosen the grip and just slip into the stream of someone else's systems and processes, and it doesn't mean it's good or bad or better or worse. It's just sort of like, it's really hard So it's
But
like moving back in with your parents.
It's like moving
Right?
back in with your parents in a strange way, yeah. But that has actually, this has like been probably the biggest year of growth for me, interestingly, not having a home base. You know, and obviously there are plans to obviously now, you know, get my own gym back in action, and, you know, we're looking at a spot. And, but, you know, to say that, you know, that I've had a tremendous amount of growth from that, working with different coaches, different athletes, different backgrounds, and people having different goals as well. So yeah. Haringey was a great one. We have a couple of exciting tournaments that we're going over to. We're heading over to Portland in a couple of weeks, going over to Sweden. You know, we're doing a team camp in Mexico this year. You know, we're heading down to LA for a couple of shows. You know, we should be back over in the UK. We're going over to Ireland. We're going over to Toronto, Montreal. So there's a lot of travel involved, and, you know, it's exceptional to see, you know, how wide boxing is applied all around the world, but actually how small the community is. And yeah, when it comes to tournaments, a lot of those are kind of on par with Haringey. So we've got an exciting season ahead.
Awesome. That was my question. What's coming down the pipe? So we know what's coming down the pipe from the, you know, competitive team side, but tell us a little bit more about what's coming down the pipe for you as a coach.
Sure. I mean, look, you know, when you're a full-time coach, you choose the lifestyle of being a coach. You know, and just like a high performance boxer chooses the lifestyle to being immersed within, you know, progressing in the sport, it's the same for a coach. And, you know, I made the choice to quit my career. I made the choice to move into the unknown a little bit from, say, for example, a financial sense, from, you know, a lifestyle sense, you know, so obviously, you know, having the balancing act of commercializing the sport to allow me to survive and pay the bills.
That's such an interesting topic that we'll maybe touch on it, but it really is. It's fascinating.
I could talk your ears off about
Oh my God. Well, me too. I mean, I've
you,
been
you
in
too.
it. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And then obviously having the balancing act, you know, of being an amateur coach that is not remunerated. You know, you volunteer your time to do this. You volunteer your time to work with athletes. You put your body and your mind on the line. You know, you develop relationships. You break relationships. It's, you know, it's full on. You know, you're immersed, and I think, you know, I'm definitely dedicated and committed enough to be, you know, applying myself in that way. But yeah, what's coming down the line is definitely, you know, keeping my ears open, my eyes open, learning from phenomenal coaches. I mean, our head coach, Jesse Pinheiro, is one of the most exceptional coaches I've ever had the pleasure of cornering with. I've cornered with him at nationals, and, you know, the speed of his analysis and therefore advice in the corner, for example, you know, let's not even talk about his programming or, you know, his eye for talent, you know, or his relationship management practices are pretty exceptional. You know, learning from people like that is very, very cool. And yeah, so my goals and kind of what's coming down the pipe for me is, you know, I'm looking for a space to have my own competitive gym, and obviously, you know, being involved in the commercial side of the sport and kind of building my client base here in Vancouver. And it's great, you know, because I get to be reminded about, you know, how people start off in the sport, and I've working with beginners or people who aren't necessarily intending to compete. You know, it's funny. I treat them all, and we kind of come to an agreement together. I said, look, you know, I know you don't want to be a boxer, but you're going to train like a high performance athlete, at least from a psychological approach and a mental approach, and because everybody can be a high performance athlete. It's about how you know, high performance doesn't necessarily mean, you know, having to have the highest level of athletic ability and being so naturally talented that you blow everybody out of the water and you're going to be competing on the national stage. You know, high performance to me is a lifestyle, and how do you apply it and what context do you provide to things, you know, and it's great. It's so lovely to see how people actually, you know, change their mindset and then their goal set to how they approach to training, just, you know, casually, you know, hitting pads and you know, maybe learning some fundamentals and seeing people fall in love with the sport. And that reminds me, like, that's that kind of X factor, that kind of unknown element as to like why I really love boxing, and being involved in the sport gives me so much back from an intrinsic perspective.
Do you have a, you know, like I don't want to call it a success story. It's that may, you know, point the finger at people that don't take this path aren't successful, but, you know, forgive me for the choice of words, but do you have a success story of someone who stepped in the gym as like really fitness minded, you know, like hitting pads so tell us about that.
I do. Obviously I can't take full credit for his success.
Okay. And you can name names because we'll shout him out.
But he's you know, he's my little brother, and obviously not by blood, Rashid Maharimfar. You know, this kid walked into my gym in Bahrain as a kind of gangly 18-year-old who'd come back from the US and decided he didn't want to study abroad anymore. And, he struggled a bit with anxiety. And, although he was quite athletic, he's like, I just kind of want to hit pads. And, he was talking about Rocky. And so, obviously, I knew
blow
that.
some steam.
Yeah, I knew his, obviously, okay, where he was just a kid and a great kid at that. And, we did a few sessions, and all of a sudden this guy's talking about competing, and I was like, oh, okay, now we're entering into a different phase and a different mindset, and and then he's talking about, coach, I want to go to the Olympics one day. No, I want to represent Bahrain one day. I want to, and I'm looking at him going, oh, you've got a long way to go, man.
Yeah.
But our mindset and our application changed, and over the years, been working together. And if he's not been working directly with me, the program that I launched there, it's called the Mulakem Scholarship Fund. It no longer exists because I had to shut my gym down, sadly. Due to COVID and the constraints of COVID, but he is now an international level boxer. He is now in the national team. He's been national champion every nationals that we've had in Bahrain. He's working with some top coaches. Kamiso Kapoleng, 3-time Olympian, who was the head coach at Bahrain Boxing Club when I moved here. He came in. He represented Botswana at the Olympics as a coach and as a competitive athlete. Tony Davis, who's, ex-Team GB, fantastic guy. He's worked with a lot of guys, Anthony Joshua, so he's had a couple of great coaches along the way. But it's so, we keep in touch, we speak, almost daily or weekly, and, he's now on an Olympic pathway. And this is a kid that came in, I want to lose a wee bit of weight. I want to learn how to knock people out and drop bodies, coach.
Yeah.
And I'm like, okay, he's 18 and, it's been lovely to see that growth in him as a man and as a pugilist. And he's fixated on that goal now, and to see his progress is just amazing. And this is the ultimate intrinsic reward, and it trumps everything else, in my opinion.
It's moments like that you all those hours that you volunteer and blood, sweat, and tears. It's like you look at someone's path that way coming to fruition, and you're going, okay, this is why I'm here.
Yeah, absolutely. The guy, I was like, the first question I asked, have you ever boxed before? No. Do you have any combat experience? Yeah, I did karate. We're talking
studied under Steven Seagal himself.
we're talking about.
I study McDojo about an hour a day.
Yeah, I'm a McDojo subscriber. I love those guys. But yeah, I know and I'm like, wow, okay, this is the background, and he's thinking maybe that the transference is there, and and it's just amazing to see his progress.
Amazing. Thanks for listening to the Empire Boxing Podcast. I'm your host, Jana. That was part 1 of our podcast with Coach Tariq. Tune in next week for the remainder of part 2.
Make sure to listen, follow, and subscribe to Empire Boxing on Apple, Spotify, and YouTube.